Hello, everyone. I'm Caitlin Moore. I work at UBT and I'm the financial literacy manager there. So if you haven't been on one of these videos before, my job is to teach anything dealing with money. So today we are going to be talking about budgeting. This will be the first of two that we'll talk about budgeting. There's some handouts that you're welcome to have. I'll send them over to Dan so he can get them out to everyone after this, just if you are interested in a budget. But there's a lot of things dealing with budget, which is great at your age, being a younger person, to learn how to do. So before I begin, you're welcome to leave your videos on. I just ask you to stay muted. I'll continue to mute if you unmute, but I just ask that you don't. Feel free to ask questions though. So unmute yourself, ask a question, then mute yourself again. I will pause in various places and ask if there's questions. So feel free to ask. I don't have my chat box up because I'm only on my laptop. Usually I have extra screens, but I'm only on my laptop today. So if Dan or Amy, you can monitor the chat box if there's anything that comes up, that would be awesome. So without further ado, let us begin. So we're going to talk about budgeting, budgeting 101 today. If I can figure out, here we go. So what is a budget? So without reading this whole thing, a budget is a financial plan for a specific period of time. That means we're going to look at a certain time frame. Usually people budget for a month. They look at their entire month because most of our bills or ongoing bills are paid monthly. Rent, utilities, car payments, things like that. So if we're looking at a monthly budget, we're just looking at how much money is coming and going during that time. That's what a budget essentially is. It doesn't have to be confusing, as long as we set the ground rules for how long we're going to be looking at this. So I'm going to be talking about monthly budgets. If you choose to do a weekly, bi-weekly, something like that, that's completely up to you. But in terms of how I'm talking about a monthly budget. Okay, so why is it important to budget? So nearly 2 out of 3 Americans live paycheck to paycheck. And living paycheck to paycheck means that, say I get paid on Friday, that by the time I get paid in 2 weeks, I have nothing left in my account. I've used all of my money by the time I get paid. Now, that could be, a pretty decent gig right there to be able to pay all your bills. And even if you're just hitting zero by the time you get paid again, because at least I'm getting paid again, right? But this doesn't leave any room for emergencies. If something comes up that's out of the ordinary, that's not accounted for in my week to week budget. So nearly 2 out of 3 Americans live paycheck to paycheck. And 40%, though I've heard it's more like 60% of Americans could not handle a $400 emergency today. Meaning, if I go out, get in my car, hit a pothole, and my tire pops, and I got to get new tires, if it costs $400, probably more like half of Americans could not afford to pay for those tires without using a credit card or borrowing money, something like that. They don't have the cash on hand. And then the APA, which is the American Psychological Association, reported that money remains the number one stressor in more than 70% of Americans. So if we really looked at the bottom line issue for our stress, most Americans would say that it's money. And that is due because everything we do deals with money. Everything we own, everything we do, everything we eat, we have to have money behind it. And if we don't have that, then those things are not available to us and they could become a major stressor, especially if there's medical reasons. If you can't afford medical care or medicine, something like that can be a real big stressor. There's effects of financial stress. So when we are stressed about money, there's things that happen to us physically, mentally, emotionally. And on our body, that's usually where we see it first. Headaches, muscle tension, chest pain, fatigue, stomach upset, sleep problems, things like that. I know for me, sleeping is a big issue when I'm stressed. I don't sleep. I think I got 2.5 hours of sleep last night because I am just dealing with some stressors in my personal life. Not money this time though, but when I am stressed, I don't sleep. And on the mood, because we're not sleeping or we're having these physical ailments, we may get anxiety, restlessness, lack of motivation, irritability or anger, sadness, depression, things like that. Mine comes out in anxiety. I'll just be very honest with you. So I don't sleep and then I get anxious. And oftentimes those go hand in hand where I get pretty anxious at 3 a.m. because I'm not sleeping yet. And I'm counting down the hours until I have to get up and go to work. So Those two things happen for me. Now, on my, let me move the pictures here, on my behavior or in the general behavior behind stress: overeating, undereating, anger outbursts, drug or alcohol abuse, tobacco use, social withdrawal. So we use coping mechanisms when we're dealing with physical ailments or our mood is off, our emotions are off. For me, it's undereating. I have no appetite whatsoever. I have to force myself to eat. Um, so all those things I can just tell you are, it doesn't have to be money stress, but it can just be stress that we deal with. A lot of times, like I said, we feel it on our body before we get to our emotions or what's going on with our mind. But if we really just sat back and said, why am I having these sleep problems? Why am I having chronic headaches? We can kind of maybe dig a little deeper and find out that maybe you are dealing with some stress that you didn't really acknowledge in the first place. But when we're talking about budgets, money can be a big stressor, and therefore it causes all these things to happen on the body. So, building a budget, the basics of building a budget. Like I said at the beginning, this doesn't have to be hard. And if budgets are hard, you're probably doing it wrong, because they really don't have to be hard. They can be repeated month after month, they can just be adjusted. There's really easy ways to make budgets. So, a lot of people say that that's, in my world, in my financial world, that a budget is a B word, because it just makes people ill to think about having to build a budget, which is why I am very keen on teaching young people how to do it, because then if you learn at your young age, it won't be hard as you get older and find a job or a career and things like that. So let's talk about how to build a budget. Essentially, there's 3 steps to building a budget. One is comparing your income to your expenses. So what's coming in and what's going out. Understanding where your money is coming from and where it's going. Those are 2 big things. So if we know how much we're bringing in and how much we're spending, maybe we know a dollar amount, we still have to understand where the money is coming from and where it's going to. Now, some people have multiple sources of income. So they have a job, maybe 2 jobs. I work with a lot of adults that have child support or SSI, things like that, where there's money coming in from different sources. And we have to understand where those is so we can account for them. And then where it's going. That's probably the hardest part of a budget, is figuring out where you're spending your money on a consistent basis, especially at a young age when maybe you don't have a lot of bills and you just kind of spend money where you want to. But it's very, very important to know where your money is going. A lot of times, the problem with figuring out where your money is going is because you don't have a bank account or an adequate bank account. Maybe you work for a company that pays you on their little debit cards, and you can't account for your bank account. It's not going into your bank account, it's on their system. And so you can't just sign into an app and see what you're spending your money on, tracking anything like that. So that's for another lesson down the road of forms of payment. But if you are being paid on one of those debit cards for work, there's a lot of things you can do to not do that, or to track how much you're making and then track it like a bank account. And I've let pals know kind of how to do that, but I would highly advise not using that source of income, but that source of payment, because you will have difficulties keeping track of your money, and even if you're getting paid appropriately. The third component of a budget is making adjustments. Now, every month, it doesn't matter if you have a solid budget, solid income, there's going to be adjustments that need to be made. For instance, if you have a medical concern come up, maybe you got medical bills that you didn't plan on at all. We usually don't plan on medical stuff, and we have to add it to our budget to get it paid off. So that's an adjustment that would need to be made to pay it off. And then once it's paid off, we take it out of our budget because we don't need to pay anything anymore. So we're constantly making adjustments, but for the most part, we know, or we're trying to understand where our money is going and coming from. So there's 3 sections to a budget, which is your income. Your net income is what we call it. So you're going to hear net a lot, and that means just essentially what you're bringing home after you've paid your taxes, any deductions that need to come come out of your paycheck. By the time you get paid, that is your net income, how much you're bringing home. And then you have your expenses. That's another part of the budget. And then your comparison. So you might have 2 solid numbers. How much are you making? How much are you spending? And that's where we're going to compare. Your budget might change every week, especially at a young age when you're not working full time or getting consistent hours. So your budget will likely change every single week or every single payday, and that's okay. There is a way to budget. It's called inconsistent income, where it's not consistent. Maybe you know that you'll get 20 hours a week, and maybe more sometimes. So you know you'll get 20 hours a week, but maybe you'll work 30 or 40. There's a lot of career fields that do that. Um, and what you want to do if that's the case, if you know that you're always going to have 20 hours or 15 hours, just budget for that. Don't budget for anything more. Budget for the smaller amount, the amount that you know is going to come in every single paycheck. That's the simple way of doing that. There's a long-term budgeting timeline. This is more for really planning out long term. We're not going to go into this, but really it's building up an emergency fund. It's some extra cash on hands just in case there's an emergency, paying off all debt. If you're a young person with no debt, try not to get into debt. Then you can skip this. Getting into debt is not necessary. And so if you can stay out of debt by paying cash, even for a car, your education, looking for ways for education to get paid for, things like that, stay out of debt as much as you can. Really, the only debt that most financial advisors would tell you is okay is a mortgage if you buy a house. That's a huge amount of money, but that's usually the only debt that is qualified as kind of a good debt, because if something were to happen and you couldn't pay your mortgage anymore, your house can just be sold and you won't have that debt anymore. So there's collateral with that debt. Um, Building up an emergency savings expands to 3 to 6 months of how much you would need if you, say, lost your job. And then moving on to working with professionals for investments and retirement and things like that. So that's kind of a long term budgeting thing. Budgeting never stops. It has a timeline of when it starts, and that should be right away. But budgeting never stops. It doesn't matter how old you are, there's always a budget to be had. I think of my grandparents that are on a fixed income, which means they're not making money anymore. They're just using what they have. A budget is very, very, very important to them. And they're in their late 80s. So even as time has gone by, they are making adjustments to their budget. So it doesn't really ever stop. It just depends on what's in it. Any questions so far? Okay. So let's talk about how to do this. So this is a graph of kind of what the big financial people in the world say how you should be spending your money. Doesn't mean it has to go this way. A lot of these things at a young age, you're not going to have responsibilities for, and that's okay. Maybe you're still living with your parents or guardians, or you don't have a car yet, or things like that. That's okay. But in the grand scheme of things, when you're an adult with a career, maybe you have your own family, things like that, this is kind of the suggested budget that a lot of financial gurus would say if you could stick within these numbers, it would be a really healthy way to spend your money because it hits all the components of where you're spending your money. But as far as building the budget, so here's the nitty gritty of what we're doing. So I have worksheets that like I said, I'll send to Dan, but you can do this at any time. You don't need any worksheets. You don't need any guides. There's some great apps out there, and we'll talk about that to help guide you through this. But essentially, you can get a piece of paper out and do this by yourself. And step one would be write down all of your income. If you have one job, allowance, whatever it is, write it down. However much you're getting that you can count on getting, no matter what, write that down. A lot of people only have one source of income. Some people have two, some people have 10. It doesn't matter where it's coming from, but we need to write that down so we know where it's coming from. And then step two is to write down all of your expenses. Now, this can get really tedious. We've got to get detailed, we've got to really know where you're spending your money. So for the most part, it's easy to account for things like rent and utilities and car payment and insurance. But then we get to things like if you have kids, your kids' clothes or diapers or formula or their extracurriculars, or if you have a pet, you're paying for pet food or maybe medical care. Grocery store and eating out are two different things on a budget. We need to know how much we're spending at the grocery store, how much we're spending eating out, which I would bet that most Americans have a pretty high eating out budget. I know the clients that I work with consistently have very large eating out budgets, including myself, because I hate cooking. And so I tend to put more money in my eating out budget than I do my grocery store budget, because I have a 3-year-old and it's easier to sometimes pick up food somewhere and go to a park and eat, and it's more fun. So it really just depends on where you're spending your money, but we want to account for everything that you're spending your money on. I love to buy coffee. I have a coffee maker at home, whatever. I love to go out for coffee. So that's part of my budget is actually, I call it fun money. It's for me to spend however I want. I can go buy shoes or I can go buy coffee. Usually it's coffee, but it's something that I know that I'm consistently spending money on every single month. And I need to account for that, because if I don't, then I'm taking money out of other places that need to be, the money needs to be reserved for that source. So we're going to write down all of our income and all of our expenses. That's it. That's how you build a budget. The next thing is, did you consider everything? It takes an average person about 3 months to build a good budget, because we forget about things. We forget about the things we're spending our money on, especially things that we don't spend money on all the time, like car registration. That comes once a year. Oftentimes we don't think about it until we get the bill in the mail, and then it's hundreds of dollars. Or Christmas gifts. We think of that around October. And so if we need to start thinking ahead, what are the things that we're going to spend money on later? And can we start saving for them now? And then once you know how much your income is, compare it to your expenses. Are you making enough money? Do you make enough money that at the end of the month, you're either breaking even, so you're spending it all, or you're spending less than what you make? So that's the ultimate goal, is to bring home more money than you're spending, because then you get to save. So we want to compare those sources. This is what my worksheet looks like. This is the income worksheet. It just gives you some options and some ideas of where you might be receiving money. And you would write down the amount. Super simple. You can add lines if you need to. Not everyone's going to fill in every single line, but it's just something to get kind of jog your memory of, oh, I might get that. I need to write down that I get money there. And then this is the expense worksheet. I have put every idea that I can possibly think of, that most families and people would budget with. Not everybody uses everything on this list, but for the most part, everything's taken care of on here. So I put down child expenses, pets, insurance, food, home, any debt that you have. So if you're paying off debt, that's an expense. That's something you're spending your money on. Transportation, entertainment. We've got to think about, are we going to the movies? Are we going to concerts? Are we just hanging out at coffee shops? What are we doing with our money? Are we paying for babysitting fees? Are we going on vacation? Do we give some of our money away? We have to account for where our money is going. So this is my worksheet, which you're welcome to use that. Pals, you guys can use these worksheets as you please. But we want the total at the bottom of what you're consistently spending your money on. And then we're going to compare them. The goal would be to at least make enough money to pay for what you're spending it on. But ultimately, the greatest goal would be that you make more money than you're spending. Now, if you're spending more money than you make, you got to ask yourself, how are you doing that? Are you going into debt? Are you using credit cards? If you are, I would highly advise to stop doing that. Rearrange your budget. It is okay to find out that you spend too much money and go back to this worksheet and say, where can I cut corners? Am I spending too much on dining out? Can I really afford to go to that concert? Do I need to find a different apartment that maybe costs a little bit less? We have to look at this budget, and just because we're spending the money doesn't mean we should. And so once you have created this budget, you have to go back and say, should I be spending the money on this? So my budget looks very, very much like this. This is how, and I use an app, and there are months that I have to go in there, and if something comes up, like say a medical bill, then I'll not add to my gift budget. So I try to save all year for Christmas or vacation, because my family lives out of state. And so I would take my son out of state for a holiday. And so sometimes I have to take money out of that budget and add it to something else. And that's okay to do that. That's what it's there for. But the only way to be able to afford to do that is if you know where your money is being spent and you're budgeting for that. So if you need to decrease the amount of money you're spending elsewhere, then you need to do that. But this will give you that big picture of if you can afford your lifestyle or not, and then how to afford your lifestyle by setting aside certain amount of dollars for certain things. There's some great resources. There's tons of budgeting apps. I'm a huge fan of Every Dollar. It just works well for me. I know a lot of people who use Mint. It's very similar. Even UBT has their own app for budgeting called Money Compass. But for me, Every Dollar, these are all free. There is a paying component to these where you can pay a certain fee and then it will go into your checking account and itemize things for you. It's not necessary because you can make a budget one month and it carries over to the next. So then all you have to do is just make adjustments. I go in there every month after I get paid and I put in the exact dollar amount that I got paid. I'll estimate for other months. So I have my whole budget planned out for the rest of the year and I'll estimate what I'm going to bring home. But then when I do um, get my check, then I just write in the actual amount because it may be a little bit more, maybe a little less. But it's these apps carry over. So you're not making your budget every single month, but it's really easy to make adjustments. And like I said, we're constantly making adjustments to budgets. And that's really important that you acknowledge that you need to make an adjustment. So I always tell people, I tell the clients that I work with, try a couple apps. And if you don't like them, just delete them, but try to find one that really works for you. Every dollar is so easy for me. Cause once I put in my budget, then when I spend, like say I go to Target and I buy diapers for my kiddo or pull-ups, I should say, I just go in there and I say, I spent $26 at Target and that takes it out of his fund. Cause I allot a certain amount of money towards that every month for him. And so then it will say, you have this much money left over. So it's really nice because then I know exactly how much I can spend in certain categories because I'm keeping track. And you build a habit to do that. I don't do that every single day. Honestly, I know my budget well enough where I don't necessarily do it every month, but I do refer back to that budget often to say, oh, I put aside this much for mechanics. So I need an oil change in my car. And I know that I have that money in an envelope here at my house, just waiting for me to spend it on an oil change. So it's nice to know that that money is there. Okay, so I get some questions and we're winding down here. I get these questions a lot when it comes to budgeting. So I don't have a job. Should I still budget? Yes. This is a really good time to budget. Maybe you're too young to have a job at this point, or you just haven't gotten one, but you get an allowance or some money from somewhere. If you only get a certain amount of money, then yes, you should budget around that. You need to know where it's going and how much is coming in. I have inconsistent income. Should I still budget? Yes, it's very important if you have inconsistent income. That is when you never really know how much you're making. Maybe you always get 20 hours, but maybe you'll get 30 or 40 one week. Always budget for the lowest amount. That's really important because if you only ever got 20 hours a week, but there's a chance you can get more, you don't want to budget for more if there's no guarantee you're going to get it. So inconsistent income is a big reason to budget. I'm not the main moneymaker in my family. Should I budget? So in a lot of households where there's two working individuals, maybe one makes more than the other, or one makes enough to pay all the bills. Should you budget? Yes, you should. Anytime you have money coming in, you should budget for that money, where it's going, how much you're putting in savings, things like that. And that's kind of part two of like what this looks like and what should be in your budget. And we'll do that next time. I'm only in high school. Should I budget? Yes, 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 yes. Please learn how to budget now. It will benefit you in the future. I don't feel like schools do a good enough job helping young people get ready for the future and adulthood and adulting, and budgeting is part of adulting, whether we like it or not. And so if you can learn how to do this at a young age, even with very little money coming in, it will be way easier for you to do it when you've got a lot of money coming in. And then I don't have I don't have many bills and I make more than I spend. Should I budget? Yeah. Even though you're making more than you're spending, it's always nice to know exactly how much you have at the end of the month to spend on whatever you want. So a budget will allow you to do that. So I've talked a lot. Does anybody have any questions?
I do.
Okay.
Okay, so my main question is, being a student in high school and thinking about college coming up soon, is I personally put over 50% of my I say over because I put everything but about $100 into my savings when I get my checks. And the only thing that I ever really take out is gas, and that's about it for me. what would you say is like the best thing to do with your savings, as far as how do you make sure that you are getting the most out of them? Like, how do you budget the college portion?
Yeah, I think you'll need to start looking at where you want to go to college and how much it's going to cost you, or how much benefits you'll get rolling in. There's always this chance that you'll get a lot more than you think. But if you are saving for college, congrats on that. That's huge. That's a big deal right there. And to put as much money as you are. There's different ways that you can like either invest that money for school, where it's growing even at your age. It can be in a 529 plan, things like that, which ask your pals person to help you with that for some info. But there's different things that you can utilize at a bank even to grow your money during this time that you would still have access to it. So maybe you put a little bit of it in some sort of investing tool, which I'm not going to say which is better. That would be between you and a banker. But there is definitely money. There's ways to kind of earn some more money if you're going to use it towards school in the meantime. So I would say just keep plugging away at what you're doing. And if you want more info, ask your pals worker and we can get in touch and we can talk about some options for you if you are looking to kind of grow that a little bit more. But keep doing what you're doing. That's pretty awesome.
Caitlin says or not Caitlin, sorry, Caitlin.
No worries.
Erica said she has, what was it, 3 savings accounts, one for college, one for a car, and one for gifts.
Wow.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah. And that's another thing is, thanks for bringing that up, Erica, because you can have more than one checking and savings account. If that makes your life easier, then go do it. If you need a checking account, like I have 2 checking accounts. One pays all the bills and one just is where I spend money. That's where my check goes and then I move things around. And I also have 3 savings accounts. Like one's for my son, one's for me, and there's different things that go on. It makes my life easier. And so if you need that kind of support by opening up multiple checking or savings accounts, go for it. A lot of times you have to keep a minimum balance in a savings account to not be charged. So depending on the bank, it may be that you need to keep $50 to $100 in there at all times. But if you're actively saving, it shouldn't be a problem. So go do it. Go open up more than one account. There was a time that I had a bank account at another bank. I had a savings account at another bank, and I didn't have a debit card to that. So I would have my check. I would split my direct deposit where most of my check went into my checking, and then a portion of that would go into this extra bank account at another bank. And that's how I saved, because I couldn't touch it. I would have had to physically go to the bank to move that money out. So that was a great way for me to save, because I couldn't do anything about it unless I went to the bank. So if you've got to do things like that, do it. There's no rules that say you can't do that. Just know that you will get charged fees. So you want to look at what you need to do to avoid fees, because you don't want to be running up fees in your accounts if you're not actively using them. So that was a great idea, Erica, to do 3 different accounts. Kudos to that. Great idea. Anybody have any other questions? If there's any other workers on, this is my information. And I've actually had a couple times that Dan has referred guardians or parents over to me. So if you know that your parent or guardian might have some questions, you don't have to bank at UBT. I'll still answer your questions. And I'm not here to sell you anything. I don't know how to do that. I don't get paid to open up accounts. So if you just have questions about anything money related, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer those questions for you. I know that Amy and Dan refer a lot of questions to me, even if the person doesn't bank with us, and that's okay. That's what I'm here for. So that being said, if there's no other questions, then we are good. But the next time we will talk kind of like how to choose what should be in your budget, or how do you know what's good for you to have in your budget and what shouldn't. So we'll go through that the next time. I believe it's in 2 weeks that we'll be talking through that.
On the 28th, it will be same time, right? Yeah.
Yep, I believe so.
Same time. So that'll be sent out by all the coaches. So
great.
But thanks a lot, Caitlin.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Caitlin.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Guys.
Bye.
Bye.